Welcome to Reddit Aliens. What piece of propaganda did the most damage? Not safe for work. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. The gasoline additive tetraethyl lead was totally safe. That OxyContin had a low rate of dependency. This ruined millions of lives and communities. There's a good book called Dope Sick about it, and they made a show on Hulu with Michael Keaton, if you haven't seen it already. Check it out. I'd argue Smokey the Bear. Before you light the torches and grab the pitchforks, hear me out. I have a degree in environmental science with a focus on forestry. There's a lot to this, so I'll try to keep it brief. Smokey the Bear was originally used as a propaganda piece by the United States Forest Service to get American population to assist in wildfire control via early reporting and self-dousing. The USFS pushed a zero-tolerance policy on any and all wildfire, assuming that it was detrimental to forest health and public safety. Wildfires actually have an integral role in the life and health of forests, as they clear out underbrush and allow larger, well-established trees that can easily survive these relatively low-intensity fires to thrive on the more readily available nutrients. Some tree species, like aspen, even flourish with fire. The US went without wildfires for 20 to 30 years, if I remember correctly, before the USFS retracted this policy. Forests across the country grew too dense to remain healthy, overpopulated with vegetation that the environment could not support. Trees grew, many died, and became forest litter, and even still, turned once lush forests into breeding pools for tree-killing species like bark beetles. For instance, one of the biggest factors in the many California wildfires are the large swaths of land covered in dead ponderosa pine trees plagued by overpopulation of forests and a specific species of beetle that targets them. It's covered in millions of acres of tinder boxes waiting for a spark. Anyway, because of the nature of tree life expectancy, the US is reaping the consequences of the mistakes of the 50s in our current time. This is, of course, only one aspect of the very complex environmental situation in the US. Climate change being another serious factor that I'm not nearly as educated on as I am with forestry, but I hope you found this interesting. I did. In the 90s, child abduction, fear porn was all the rage on the nightly news, as they were always the one-in-a-million crazy stories with horrific deaths and would play weekly. Chris Hansen's To Catch a Predator didn't help. However, these kidnappings were extremely rare in reality. Kids lost almost all unsupervised playtime, which, as it turns out, is very helpful for learning how to socialize. When Coca-Cola paid off doctors to say that fat was what caused fatness rather than sugar, this has destroyed the health for generations. It was the total converse of the truth, pushed to all American children and many internationally about their health. Dr. Andrew Wakefield and his false study. Dr. Robert Homan Kwok's 1968 letter in New England's Journal of Medicine talking of Chinese restaurant syndrome caused by MSG without any scientific evidence added a lot of content to pre-existing stigma towards East Asians. However, blinded experiments could not prove his claims. It might not be the worst, but when the woman who spilled hot coffee on herself from McDonald's, she ended up with third-degree burns because the coffee temp wasn't regulated correctly and McDonald's paid people to make fun of her, and people still do to this day. There are a lot of powerful examples here. The one I think about the most is back in the 80s in the US. We were told constantly how the Japanese were going to rule the world because of their work ethic. Americans gave up a lot of workers' rights and time for their lives. When I finally was able to travel outside the US, I heard about how Americans are workaholics. It dawned on me that there was some BS propaganda going on that facilitated the current shitty situation in the States. Andrew Wakefield's fraudulent research claiming a link between vaccinations and autism for the purpose of selling his own safe vaccines. He single-handedly set back not just childhood vaccinations with a resulting unprecedented spike in measles, but fostered an anti-science sentiment that is still bearing rotten fruit in the current COVID pandemic. It's rare that you can point your finger to one person and say, "You are personally responsible for millions of deaths. Yet here we are. De Beers and their ad agency NWA convinced America that diamonds were valuable. Ancel Keys, faking the results of a study on heart disease and related to how much dietary fat people eat. His graph showed that higher the fat you eat, the higher your heart disease will be. It was fake. There was no correlation between dietary fat intake and heart disease. This started a whole business of low-fat products. This caused obesity to rise massively, as high-carb diets correlate to heart disease and obesity. This one study, and the effects it has had, definitely claim more lives than any war. Perhaps not the most damaging, but certainly a vile example, when Pope Benedict XVI told the people of sub-Saharan Africa that condoms would actually make the HIV/AIDS crisis worse. This obviously drew extreme criticism from everyone that actually wanted to end or improve the crisis. It is a peak example of one valuing the perpetuation of their suspicious beliefs over the life of their followers. Getting Americans to focus on media outrage rather than teaching them how to read legislations. 99% of people I meet that claim to be into politics seem to never talk about legislation, which blows my mind. They'd rather talk about who said what on Twitter, lol. You can literally ignore everything a politician says. Their job exists to read, write, and vote on legislation. Ignore everything they say, and just look up what legislation they wrote or co-wrote, or how they voted on legislation. This will tell you whether you should vote for them or not. It's also a big reason why so many idiots think we're having the worst president in history, despite not being able to tell you which legislation made them so bad. Drives me nuts. I feel like I'm in a country filled with morons who care more about Twitter drama than how their government actually functions. William Randolph Hearst printing anti-cannabis propaganda to squash the expansion of hemp that directly competed with his business. Think of all the people jailed and lives ruined, not to mention all the applications, medical and technological, that were halted. Well, luckily people stopped reading and buying magazines, so it's legal in almost every state now, so blaze up, let's go 420. Iraq has weapons of mass destruction. 20 years later, several 100,000 Iraqis are dead, US servicemen and women are still suffering the effects of PTSD, and of course, untold billions of dollars lost in a failed war. After the slaves were free, they grew and sold watermelons as a way to earn money. They also ate it because why not? It's delicious. Former slave owners in the South didn't like this. They didn't like that their former property was not only enjoying a fruit they used to grow for them, but that they were making a living from it. And so, owning newspapers, they pushed the idea that Ns ate watermelon because they were unclean, and a bunch of other stuff I won't mention, it's so abhorrent. They would eventually start printing pictures, the first of which I believe was around 1868 to 1869. What followed was a campaign so insidious that by 1900, they had everyone believing that watermelon had always been a symbol of how Ns were an inferior race. It got so bad that it reported that a woman who was a nanny to a small boy met that boy later, and when she asked him if he would like some watermelon, he replied, "I don't eat blank food." And this was a woman he reportedly loved. He was said to have been really upset when she was freed and left their family home. To this day, watermelon is still seen as a negative to black people. Instead of being a symbol of hope and prosperity, it became a symbol of hate and ridicule. The anti-German propaganda from World War I, not directly, but because after the war everyone knew that it had been propaganda, which made them ignore most of the reports of the Holocaust starting in Nazi Germany. The Protocols of the Elders of Zion. It amplified anti-Semitism and is still the base of conspiracy theories that there's a Jewish elite that controls banks, the media, etc. The carbon footprint is a lie. It's not, but it is. BP made that popular in 2004, and all these years later, we're still tuning off half the lights like it makes a bit of difference. Oil companies like BP contribute 71% of the carbon pollution today. So even if the people were made up the other 29% and we cleaned it all up, we would still be effed because of them. But that footprint bullshit took the focus off of them and put it on to us. It's the same with what happened with the crying Indian ad in the 70s. Instead of focusing on the companies mass-producing plastic, the focus was put on us for buying and disposing of it properly. In other words, in both cases, they took what should be an issue of manufacture and made it an issue of consumption. Not that many years ago, BP spilled 450 million barrels of oil into the waterways, so they don't have a lot of moral high ground to stand on. So if you forget to throw out a bottle one day, the world will probably be okay. Be conscious of it. It'd be nice if they were, too. I hate how the Nazis perverted the swastika. Prior to them, the swastika was seen as a symbol of good luck and had several religious usages. There still exists furniture from pre-Nazi times with swastikas on them. The swastika is a beautiful, symmetric symbol and appears occasionally in math and nature. It's really unfortunate that we can't use it anymore because of the Nazis. I don't know if it's a single piece of propaganda, but generally the idea that Emperor Hirohito was literally a god or divine being. The scale of destruction and tragedy in Japan during World War II is almost unfathomable. I'm sure you could make arguments that there were other factors that contributed significantly to the Japanese public's outlook on the war, but I think everything comes back to Hirohito being divine. They were fighting with or for God himself. So many millions of innocents were killed or killed themselves and their families because of it. Not to mention the fact that it necessitated the use of nuclear weapons. Maybe a lot of things go similarly, but if the Japanese people thought, this is just a government of men, normal people, we can resolve it if we don't like it. Instead, this is God. We must do what God says no matter what. It could have saved millions of lives and altered history significantly. When the CIA dropped care packages during the Cold War in areas of hostility just past enemy lines with condoms inside that were labeled as small but contained XL condoms, so they thought our penis average was monstrous. What? The one about ADHD, A, being a fake disorder for parents to use in order to drug or medicate their children, B, whereby parents are taught to think that chemical treatments for their child's ADHD symptoms is shameful and stigmatized, C, that the cure for ADHD in children is in repetitive, rigorous physical discipline, yeah, that type of propaganda is especially hurtful to parents and their relationship with their child. McCarthyism completely trashed the layperson's understanding of the distinction between socialism and communism. Actually, it's more of a range. Now, welfare and other social programs are often seen as the slippery slope that will turn the USA into a failure like the USSR, and not the kind of thing that just about every modern developed democratic nation has, which improves the lives of its citizens. Lysenkinism. The Soviet idea that genetics wasn't real and that Leninist social theory applied to biology and agriculture, compounded with no one wanting to disagree with party line, led to famine of millions. The deaths that resulted are a direct result of these policies.